when you're not counting the cost, there becomes such ramifications that impact all different parts of our lives. Most people try to control. They want to control because they're trying to limit stress. They're trying to limit disruption in their life. But every decision makes disruption.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I am here with my wonderful, incredible, amazing host of the New Rules Podcast, Mr. Write New Rules himself, Adrian Crawford.
What's happening, Bree? How are you today?
I'm doing well. I've been tired lately.
You have been tired, Bree.
I've been a sleepy girl.
Definitely. And for all those out there, when Bree's sleepy girl, that literally just morphs into grumpy girl, which means that I feel the brunt of that.
I have to take deep breaths. And you know what? Vice versa.
Chill. Why can't you just own that you're sleepy girl, the grumpy girl? But why do I have to get thrown into this? You can just say you're right. You can just say, okay, you're right. No, because why do you have to throw me into it? Why can't you just own it and be good with that?
I do in real life all the time.
But why do you just why do you tell the people? Why do you just have to tell the people about me? What do I have to do with this? We were just talking about you.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, that's true. You too.
but do you see how you just threw me under the bus with you?
Because we all get grumpy. It's something for the listeners to learn from.
Wow. Okay.
We all get sleepy. We all get grumpy.
Cool.
You just have to own it.
Got it. I get it. You just threw me under the bus with you. I got it. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I was gonna start off on a fun note, but maybe we should just jump in.
No, start on a fun note.
What's something you're looking forward to?
Just like this month in general, somewhere, anything?
Whatever you desire.
I would probably say I am looking forward to, my trip that I'm taking in a few days. So me and my closest friends, we go somewhere once a year. We are heading out to Wyoming. We're going to Jackson Hole, so I'm super excited to go do that. Yes, so going out there, Whiteville. So I'm excited to go out there. But no, it's gonna be a lot of fun. We always have a lot of fun together, and honestly, we got a pretty sweet Airbnb. I'm very much so a snob when it comes to that. So I try to normally pick where we go, and if I need to put some extra bread towards it, I will, because where I sleep matters a lot to me. So we got a really cool Airbnb. So I'm excited to do that and just hang out with them. So it's gonna be fun.
Cool, that's exciting.
What about you?
I'm going to a Justin Timberlake concert.
Really? When?
Yeah. In like about a month or two.
Nice. Who are you going with?
My mom.
No, it's so sweet.
No, it's exciting because whenever I was little, we used to bump Justin Timberlake in the car all the time.
Nice.
So it's, a little cute thing.
Very nice. That should be fun. I heard his concerts are amazing. Yeah, he's a performer, so I can't imagine. It's probably going to be incredible. So, gotta let me know, Breezy.
I'm excited.
Today I'm going to talk about this concept of eyes wide shut and really just the hidden costs when it comes to decisions. I think we all know that when we make a decision that it's going to have an impact, but I think a lot of times in decision making there are a lot of hidden costs that we don't know. And so we go into it really, saying that we think our eyes are wide open, but really they're shut, not seeing that. And it ultimately when we get there, it probably costs us a lot more than we expected once we kind of make a decision. So I want to talk about that because I think a lot of people are consistent. We all are making decisions all the time. The question is that do we actually know the cost of those decisions that we're making?
So would you say that the goal is to be able to predict any of the sacrifices that you're going to have to make before you make the decision?
I think that it's not about predicting everything. It's not about predicting the future to where you have every decision that's out there. What you want to be able to do, though, is that I think so many times we can only see the obvious things, and there's a lot more that goes into, to the decision-making process. There are a lot of things that can actually be hidden. There's a lot of things that go to really dealing with you that may not be for someone else. So, for example, if you're going to move to a different city, the impact that would make on you versus me, it could be different. You've only, from what I know, you've only moved to a couple different places, right? Like that are outside of I know when you went to college and you came back to the state of Florida. For me, I lived in a lot of different places growing up. And so the impact would be a little bit different. And I would probably know a little bit more of the hidden costs because I've moved from state to state to state. And then also my background, my upbringing, how does that impact me emotionally when moving from a place to whatever? I think there's all those types of things that are underneath it. And many times people don't have their eyes open to what that could cost us. Also, we don't have our eyes that are open to, things that really matter to us that we're going to have to maybe give up, or opportunities we may lose by making this decision. And especially in today's world, to where I think decisions can be very flippant. They can be just very feelings based. I think it's really important as a leader that you're actually making decisions that you really think through the consequences, the costs, good and bad, as you go through it. So you have to have your eyes wide open in it.
What happens when you don't count the cost?
I think when you don't count the cost, it really starts to impact you emotionally. I think you get into it, and what'll happen, you'll start getting really frustrated, but you'll get frustrated at the wrong things. You may get frustrated at the person, at someone. You may get frustrated at your work. You may get frustrated with a friend or whoever, whatever the situation may be. And that may not be the real issue, is because maybe you get in there and you're a lot more overwhelmed because there were a lot more costs or a lot more things you're having to now not be able to do because you said this. And so what ends up happening, it compounds. We end up getting more frustrated with people. We end up hurting more relationships. It ends up impacting us mentally and emotionally in that process. And so I think when you're not counting the cost, there becomes such ramifications that impact all different parts of our lives.
How frequently do you think that we end up in situations where we say yes, but we haven't really paid attention to the consequences?
I think that if I were just, again, this is not, statistically stats behind it, but just kind of through life, I think most decisions people make, they don't thoroughly think through it. I think people just kind of just go through it. And now, again, if you have a natural temperament where you worry, or you're very you're more of a planner, you may think a little bit more. If you're somebody like me where it's dude, you're just going to go for it, right? So I think a lot of times people make decisions. I think it's very rare they fully count the costs. I think a lot of times we just make decisions, kind of go with it, and then we just kind of figure it out as we go.
What is the difference between counting the cost and trying to predict what's going to happen so that you can control?
It's a great question. I think counting the cost is being able to, it's more of saying, when you go into it, am I willing to what this is going to impact me, good or bad? You know what I'm saying? Because I always tell people, when you make a decision, counting the cost also is the good stuff that comes with it. So all of a sudden, let's say you're making a decision now, and man, this decision I made is going to now make me more money. Well, here's what I say comes with that now. Now there's a responsibility for that money. Now, you have to say, okay, how am I going to invest that money? I'm going to have to think different now about that I didn't have before. And you may say, well, that's a good problem. It is, but it is another level of stress that happens that way. So I think you have to really, and again, it's about counting those costs versus when you try to control, you're in there, and I hear what you're saying. You're trying to get underneath it, trying to make sure, I got to make this work for me. And I think that's probably the big thing is this. When you make a decision, you have to know what is coming with that, the stressors that come with that. Most people try to control. They want to control because they're trying to limit stress. They're trying to limit disruption in their life. But every decision makes disruption. And so if you're always just constantly thinking about, man, how do I control this so I don't have to worry about making disruptions to my life, I think that's when it gets unbalanced. That's when I think it gets a little bit out of whack.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I was going to ask you was when you make decisions, and you're also, counting what it is that you're going to sacrifice, you're kind of weighing between what am I going to have to give away, and what am I going to get? Mm-hmm. Is the point to think about what you're going to get when you make this decision, or is there other people that should be considered within that?
Yeah, I think it's just where you're at, in life, right? So let's say if you're single, definitely, first, you're responsible right now for yourself. There's not really maybe anybody else that's involved. So I think, yes, you're going to think about yourself. I think if you're married, you're in a significant relationship, you have children or something like that, yeah, you definitely have to think about them. You have to think about the impact that's going to have on them. You're going to have to think about, man, what if it may be great for your career, but it could be bad for your family. Your family may be in a great community. Your kids may be in thriving relationships, a really good school. Maybe you have a child who struggled academically and they finally found the right place. And then you have to really count the cost of saying, man, Because it's always easy to say, well, okay, I'm going to make this more money. They're going to get this job. Okay, when we go up there, we're going to, it's a school. We can find a better education for them up there, whatever. And you decide to go. But what if that child's very comfortable? Now you go up there. That adds another level of stress, because what if they don't? What if they don't find that place? What if you go up there and it becomes harder? Now, that's fine. You've made more money, more career opportunity advancements, and that has lifted the burden financially. But now you've added a whole other burden of now the impact that it's having on your family. So to answer your question, I think it's just depending on who's in the proximity of your life at that time. That will determine how much you think about yourself versus thinking about others.
So there are certain situations in life that equip you, and I guess further refine you about what it looks like to consider other people in the decisions that you make, like marriage, for example.
Yep.
Whether you counted the cost before, or not, you're in it, and now you have to consider your spouse, your children, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
What does it look like for somebody who is single, maybe somebody who's younger, who doesn't have as much I guess this isn't the right word, but relational responsibility to other people within their life in the same way as people do with a spouse or children? How do you make sure that you're not making decisions out of selfishness?
No, it's a great question. I think that it's always, we talk about it here all the time, but I think you have to dig to why. I think if you are making decisions solely based off of only what it's going to bring you in the sense of this, so let's say, man, I'm going to make this decision and I feel like it's going to give me way more just, visibility. All right, well, then you ask, okay, well, why do I need visibility? Is there something greater than yourself in that visibility? That's when I think it becomes a selfish thing, when you're like, I want visibility for the sake of my own brand, for what I want to do, because it ultimately is going to give me more approval, more access to whatever, versus saying, no, I want to get more visibility because I believe my messaging or I believe my product or whatever out there is going to impact a lot more people, so I want to get it out there. I think you have to ask yourself, why do you want to do those things? When you're an individual and you're not maybe relationally connected with others, you're not relationally responsible like you are if you were in a relationship or marriage. I think you have to always dig to why. Why are you doing this? And at the end, if it's just always about what you can, material things you can get, or things that maybe would prop up some insecurities in you, that's when I think it can end up going bad. And that's when I think you need to maybe readjust, rethink about what decision you're about to make. Because even though you get those things and you may do it, it comes with a whole other set of problems. Because what I'll tell you is that, let's say that decision, you make a decision to go and whatever it is, and it's giving you more influence, more recognition. Well, what that does though, I've seen this in my own life, you're never satisfied. So now what that's going to create, a whole other level of stress. Also, let's use this idea of you make a decision, you get more influence, more opportunity. Well, now that's more critique, more criticism. That's one thing I've thought about a lot, where I'm like, I've always wanted, bigger platform, things like that. But as I've gotten older, I've been thankful now for the process I've gone through, because though I wanted a bigger platform, I think when I was younger, the critique of others would have impacted me. Even now, I think about the critique of others and how I'm learning more and more to have tougher skin, because that would impacted me. Because though, yeah, great, I've got more followers, more access, more people hearing the messaging. Now I got way more people with way more comments and way more now stress, way more things I have to block out of my life. And am I willing to do that? Because a lot of people just think, they only think about the good stuff. Oh man, I'm going to do this. But, well, you think about what's coming behind that. Because whenever you're having success, there's always the negative that's going to come. And are you willing? That's a cost. Are you willing to bear that cost? Are you willing to bear the cost of saying, man, you know what? I may not be able to really be on, though I'm using this social media for something. I may not be able to really look that much on social because of, man, I may not ever look at my comment section because people are just brutal. Or whatever it may be, because why? And sometimes people don't ever count that cost. And then here's what happens. When people do have negative things about you in the comments, you're like surprised. I think about the fact of pastoring, and one of the things that I talk to my friends about, we talk about all the time. Yeah, there's people who have a lot of complaints at times, but actually, like, as a pastor, when you actually read the Bible, in the New Testament, there's a guy by the name of Paul. Most people complained. Like, it was just always issues. And I'm like, and I always tell myself, like, what did I expect? And so I think so many times people don't go into things knowing, no, you're going to get this other negative side to it. And you got to be okay. And you don't get the luxury to then, like, complain about it. or to like, I can't believe this is happening. What did you expect is going to happen? Like, I mean, like when you start getting success in life, do you all of a sudden, like, when does it happen in human history where you got success and there was no one who didn't like you? Like, you know, and people go in like, I can't believe this, and the haters. I'm like, yes, and you don't. And so I think those are the costs that come with it, if that makes sense. I know that's a lot, but I think that's kind of where, you know, it kind of takes you down that road.
What do you think is the core driver within us that makes us fool ourselves into thinking? Obviously, we know, and like you said, like we know in our brain, logically, that these are the things that could come with this decision that I make. What is the driver in us emotionally that makes us to believe that, you know, somehow we're not going to be the one that happens to?
Because I think that we live in a culture and time to where we've been taught that we're all just so unique and that we're all so rare. And I do believe human beings are unique. But, you know, we've said it before, like our good friend Dr. Zoda says, like we're all like, you know, we're all our unique snowflake, you know, but we're all frozen water. And I think if you think you're always different, then you think things aren't going to hit you the same way, because when you always think you're so unique, then the rules won't apply to you. But most individuals are regular. Like that is one of the greatest things that you can accept in your life, that you're regular. And when I say that, I've said that in so many different environments, and people, when I say that, they gasp. You hear it, audible gasp, because people, like, they're offended that I said that. I'm like, no, you are regular. Because when you're regular, you begin to have a true understanding of who you are, and then you're able to navigate life well. But when you always think you're going to be the anomaly in the situation, and then you're never the anomaly in the situation, then it messes you up. But when you come to that place of being regular, and then if you are different, like if you are that like extraordinary person, let the results show that. But most people, they're not that way. And we just, because we're deeply insecure and we want to think that we're more than what we are, because if we are more than what we are, then for whatever reason, it gives us a greater sense of security, a greater sense of belonging here. And I just think that just gets us turned upside down a lot of times.
How is it that when you embrace what is ordinary, you become extraordinary?
Because I think you start to realize who you are and your gifts and your strengths and your makeup. And then you begin to focus on that. But if you're always trying to be like this one of one that's over here, but what if you don't have one of one like gifts, right? Like every time I use Elon as an example, like he's one of one of thinkers or inventors and stuff he's done. So if you're always trying to invent like that, then you're never going to get there. Like the way he's made up. But here's the thing. You think about Elon, yeah. But then do you watch the other sides of him? We see all the great things. We see SpaceX. We see Tesla. We see what he did with PayPal. All those things. Now, and Neuralink. But then on the other side, we get to see the other impact of his life socially. I mean, broken relationship after broken relationship. The dude can't keep friendships. I mean, all the other stuff. I'm like, okay, that stuff's great. He makes all this money, but then he loses this. Which again,
sorry to interrupt you. Did you see that tweet where he basically talked about how? I don't know if they're called tweets anymore, but he talked about how since he's been a father, he's realized like how crazy similar it is between engineering technology and raising a kid. He used different words, but you mentioned that, and I've been meaning to ask you about it.
No, not at all. Do you want me to answer that now, or just keep going with where I was going?
No, you can roll with it, whatever you want.
But I think that when you watch him and you look at his life, what you begin to see is he's given up stuff. So yeah, you get all the the fame, the money, the whatever, but the level of pain behind that, the bro. And I'm not saying this at all to critique Elon. I'm just saying like. We just look at all the stuff that's, up here, but then, like, do you look at the other stuff? You know what I mean? And then on the other side of that, though, which is interesting, is because then everybody else will then diminish his work because they'll say, well, look at his personal life. And I'm like, okay, yeah, look at his personal life. But also, like, how many people have you who got the same type of personal life who never did all this stuff that's impacted humanity like that? And so I think what you ultimately have to land on in this process is that you have to become okay with yourself, because the more you're okay with yourself, the more you can start to figure out what your skills and your gifts, and you do become extraordinary at the things you were meant to be extraordinary at whatever level that looks like.
Can you talk about sometimes that your limitations have felt constraining in times where they felt freeing?
Yeah, I think emotionally. I think at times the ups and downs I can have emotionally can be limitations because when things are down, it's hard for me to push through certain things. It's hard for me to kind of like to have the creative energy, and sometimes that can limit things. I think sometimes that can limit me as a husband. That can limit me as a father. When my emotions are kind of in, when they're kind of in that down state and down place. But I also see the other side of that is that sometimes when the wave is going, that it's what creates the magic as well. So I see both sides of that coin, but that's one way I can see the limitations. I can see the limitations as well. For me, that I like to do a lot of different things. Sometimes, like I really wish I was just focused on one thing because I feel like if I focus on just one thing, how much could I see that one thing become really, really big? But I don't feel like I'm supposed to do that one thing. I feel like there's a few things I'm supposed to do. So what does that mean? That means the growth for those things are a little bit slower than it would be if I had one sole focus. And I get some people say, well, why don't you just focus on this? And then once you've done that, jump to the next thing. But I just never felt like I was supposed to. I feel like I would get very bored doing that. And so I feel like that's why I jump into things. But I do see the limitations of like jumping from a couple different things and leading a few different things at once.
How often do you find yourself saying yes to things without considering the consequences?
When I was younger, freaking all the time, where it was like I would get into it and then you're like, crap, and then you just have to figure it out. I think as I've gotten a little bit older, I've gotten better, but I still find myself doing, kind of saying yes to things maybe I should say no to, because especially when I see something that I have proximity to, I see the problem and I have the skill set to fix it. And what I'll do is jump straight in, and kind of like, and because I have a skill set, then people will definitely want you to do it. But I realize sometimes just because I see the problem, have proximity, and I have the skill set for it, does not mean it's my responsibility or I'm supposed to do that. And so that's one thing that I would say gets me in trouble now is getting involved in things that maybe I should not get involved in. Because once I do that, that takes time and energy that's going to be taken away from something else.
You mentioned that whenever you were younger, you would get yourself in situations and then you'd have to figure it out.
Yep.
So I want to press into that more, because that's not what people do now. They get themselves in situations and then they leave.
Yeah.
So what was within you that would keep those things going, and how do you know when you're like, oh, I didn't consider this, I need to back out of it now, or how do you know when to keep going?
Yeah, because I think there's a big part of me of responsibility. So I'll give you an example where responsibility, but also I can see people for who they can be and see if I can give them an opportunity, man, they would be great. So one of the things I would do, I would hire people without fully counting the cost of what it was going to take financially, whatever. I would bring them on. They would be fine for a couple months. And then it's like, oh, shoot, man, okay, we had a few dips here. All right, well, I feel responsible. So I'm not going to be like, hey, you're not getting paid now. What then I would do is then have to go and figure it out where I would take the hit personally financially to make sure they were fine. But what that led to over time is that it would kept me stressed because I'm having to figure out other things over here financially for my own home and my own kind of like well-being. But for somebody else, when I should have just really thought through, okay, is it really needed? Just because I see this person's potential, just because I think this person can be helpful right now, is it the most important hire we can make right now? And it's going to get us to that next level financially. Maybe that's 6 months from now, a year from now. And I've got to trust that. I think that was the difference. And I can tell you, I made a few different hires like that caused a lot of stress because I hired them way too early because I saw their potential. And then I ended up having to scramble to do that. And I think it's just, I watched my father. I think part of just my makeup is to be responsible. If I'm responsible for doing something and I say I'm going to do it, then I have to do it. And I just had this thing in me where there's no way I can bring you on. And then I didn't count the cost to do a good job to then turn right back around and let you go after you've maybe moved or you quit a job or whatever. I feel like that. I mean, I literally felt like that was completely wrong to do that. I think today, those who they get in a situation and then they bail out because I don't think they've been built underneath the impact, or them understanding the impact of their choices. Because man, when you do that, it really harms people. When you make choices and that can impact other people, and then you just bail out and you don't stick in it, man, that really, really impacts people emotionally. And I've seen where that impacts people for years because of a decision that someone made and didn't stand in there and take responsibility for it. And so I'll tell you, if you make a decision that's impacting other people, man, you need to do everything you can to make that right. Now, there are times where you get to a point where, like, okay, I can't do this. Then you need to be honest, very clear, very quick with somebody to let them know that. Because when you drag it out, it ends up being way worse of an issue, and it's very unkind to other people.
How do you think that, with the financial example, how do you think that your ability to kind of like ultimately figure it out kept you in the position to redo it over and over again? Because you weren't like forced, because ultimately it would end up working out, even though it might have not been the best option that you could have gone with each time.
Yeah, because here's what happened. It ultimately worked out, and I could just easily justify it. Oh, look at what it did for them, and man, yeah, we did do this. But here's what I would tell you. It always has an impact long term. What I started to realize was that, man, even though those were stressful moments, I had the ability to just getting through. I had a high tolerance to get through it. You've been around me now. I think a lot of years of doing that and carrying undue stress rewired my body in a negative way, to where now it's impacting me in such an emotional way and such a physical way that I'm having to try to rewire that now. And so I think that a lot of times, you're right. I didn't get the picture. I was kind of, yeah, it worked out, and let's just keep going. Versus like, hey, just keep moving. And here's when I really started to realize this is because my wife is we're a lot similar in that area where we're like, man, where she's she's way more thoughtful, but we definitely feel that thing of responsibility. But I watch hers in a little different way, to where in her business, she would have people she would be slower to hire people. Hers are a little bit different for people who actually were customers for her, and they wouldn't pay things, or they would be slow to pay. She'd be like, oh no, it's okay, and I'll make it work. And then all of a sudden, she's got a crazy amount of things that are owed to her, and she's over here with with plenty of money that's right there, but they're in accounts receivable, and she's over here trying to make something else work. And I used to look at her and be like, man, why are you doing this? And I'll be really critical internally, and I'm like, oh shoot, I do the same thing. It's just a different way. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's where, again, you got to think through those costs. And it took me a long time. I think it took me to get to a place of it impacted me emotionally and physically at such a level that got me to start flipping and changing.
Mm. What are some things that you have gained because of the sacrifices that you've made?
I think in some of the sacrifices I've made, things I've gained, I actually gained, I think, great relationships. I think I gained wisdom and insight of like how not to do it. I've learned the wisdom and insight as well to when you get yourself in a tough situation, what are the ways to get out of it? I learned how to do that. So that's why I can find myself in situations and navigate out of it pretty quick, because sometimes they were self-induced issues that I put myself in. So I would say the biggest thing I learned was like wisdom and insight from those situations.
When you look at this through a relational lens,
mm-hmm.
Let's look at a situation where you might be equal. So like friendships, marriage, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Should you always be making the same amount of sacrifices for one another?
No, absolutely not. It's all seasonal. I think that early on, for example, my wife made a ton of sacrifices for me and for like our son Jalen early on. Where it was way more than the sacrifice I made. But then later on, there were some sacrifices that I made that were a lot more than the sacrifice she was making. And I think that that's where a lot of times, yes, it shouldn't be where it's all one-sided. But when you're in a relationship, you have to realize that you're in a team. You're a team. And so you do what it takes. What does it help to be the team successful? If only one person is always sacrificing, that's not going to help a team be successful. But there's also seasons of time where, no, one person's sacrifice is really needed because this other person can't, because they have an opportunity that's in front of them. And so I think you have to be okay with that. And I think so many times when people, I see it all the time, when people start looking at this idea of fairness, well, you don't do this and I'm going to do this, you've missed the point. You're on the same team. And the point is about the team winning. And the team winning is, man, what does it mean for us as a family or what us as a friendship to have success? What does that look like? And then you're willing to do those different types of things for one another because you really do care about the success of the other person. And I think and I think also when we feel like we sacrifice for something, then we feel like we're losing out. We feel like, man, if I sacrifice, I'm never going to get this back. Or if I sacrifice, then, well, I got to be the one. I got to control it. Versus, remember, we talk about this all the time, the world's abundant. See, if you know the world's abundant, you're willing to sacrifice because you know there's plenty of time, there's plenty of opportunity for you, and plenty of resources for that to come back your way to then something even better. And so watching my wife give up early on a lot of dance stuff for her for the sake of, Jalen, as we talked about, being on the spectrum and really having to work with him. But now watching the impact now she has in the dance world is like way more than she ever would have had there. But it was a sacrifice she was willing to give up. And also in that, Jalen's impact on what he's getting ready to do, getting ready to graduate high school, getting to go play college basketball, do all those things. So people, again, didn't think he'd be able to do any of those things. A lot of that's credit to Wendy and a lot of sacrifice she made in that season of her life, really, where she had platforms and opportunities, but she was willing to step off of those platforms in order for our son to take those steps as I was building something else in our career. And so I think that's kind of how you have to look at it in those things where, man, like at the end of the day, you're on a team and you got to understand time and seasons of life and that the world's incredibly abundant and you'll have opportunities.
What would be your advice to somebody who is starting to feel bitter because in their relationships, they feel like they're giving more than somebody else? And I feel like there's two different ways to go about that. It's like, maybe it's sometimes you have more, so you give more, like monetary wise. I have more, so I spend more kind of thing. Yep. But then there's also the component of like, with my time, I'm like super tight with my time. Yep. And so whenever I do give it up, it means so much to be able to prioritize, this time with you. Yep. But you have an abundance of time. Yep. So it's not as costly when you give up your time, to be together or something. Yep. And then over time, you start to develop like forms of bitterness for the unequal like weight that's being carried. Yep. What would your advice be?
I think you have to be honest. And this is one of those things we talk about with your eyes wide open, right? You have to evaluate the situation and know what you're dealing with and who you're dealing with. A lot of times people get like, they act shocked with like, I can't believe they're selfish. I'm like, man, that MF was selfish the entire time. You just refuse to, especially like let's say it's a romantic relationship. We all think we're better than what we are. And we all say, well, yeah, like if they love me, they're going to do this and whatever. And you go in and you're saying, and you have this expectation of love. If they love me, they will do this for me. And you're like, okay, well, true, there is a sacrifice that's there, but also on the other side of it, that's not how it works. When you go into a thing, you're like, no, freely I'm going to give regardless of what you do. Now, to answer your question, if you're starting to get bitter, you've got to dig underneath it saying, okay, are you giving too much? Because here's what, you can give too much if you're doing it from a place of codependency, if you're doing it from a place to get love, to get acceptance. Or, man, they'll stay connected with me if I give them more of my time. Then that's a broken part of you. You're not really doing that out of a free place in your heart. You're doing that to get something from them. So I would be the first thing you do. The second thing is that if it is something, have you communicated? A lot of times we get bitter is because we never communicate to the person expectations. And so what we do is we expect them to just know it. Well, they should just be aware of it. If they love me or care for me, then they'll be aware of this. That's not the case. I mean, how many times have you had things in your life where you're like, crap, I didn't even know that was going on. I wasn't aware of that. I'm really sorry that happened. Instead of just being clear. And I think a lot of times people really get bitter because they don't communicate. They don't say what's going on, and they let it build up till it gets to this breaking point. So I think, one, get to the basement. Is it codependency? Two, have you communicated? Like, hey, if you feel like you're giving more than the other person, have you said that to them? And you may have to do that more than once. Have you asked clarifying questions? Instead of saying, hey, you don't do this, ask, hey, here's how I feel. Can you help me understand this a little bit better? I think that's how you have to walk through it.
How do you navigate the two, because there's a little bit of dichotomy whenever it comes to sacrifice, and that there are times where it's like, I am doing this so that I can get this back. And if I don't get this back, it is not worth it for me to do this. And there's times where that's appropriate. And then there's also times where it's like, I need to fully understand what I'm giving up. And I am still going to choose to give it up freely, like regardless of what it is that I get back, regardless of what it is that you do for me. How do you navigate those two things?
I think that, okay, so I think, let's start from the latter. When you're saying, man, I know what I'm giving up, and I know I'm supposed to give this up, and it's going to be at a high cost, right? Regardless of what I'm getting back. I think when it's something that's tied to maybe something that's missional in your life, when it's, so for example, early on, I would find myself in environments to where I was giving my time and energy towards something, and monetarily, I wasn't getting things back. Matter of fact, I was giving way more. Matter of fact, I'm in a situation right now to where this situation, I've given probably countless hours to an organization without getting anything for years. And now, at a really critical juncture for this organization, they're now seeking after me and fiscally going to, compensate me. And also, they want so much of my thoughts and opinions to help them in this next phase of the organization. My point, though, is that I felt like I was supposed to do that because I felt like it was a part of the missional thing in my life, a part of my purpose in life. I think sometimes if something is purposeful, what you're supposed to do, you may go out there and you may be giving some things up, and you may be giving up more than you're getting back. Now, when I say what you're getting back, you have to define what you're getting back, or what are you looking to get back? Because a lot of times what that means, it's like, for certain situations, is money. I'm not getting any money in this situation. So but what if you're getting tons of wisdom, tons of insight, tons of knowledge that you never would have gotten, even though you gave a lot of time, you never would have got this knowledge or insight. But but I'm working so hard. You're learning a skill set you never would have learned because they gave you an opportunity. That's incredibly valuable. There's so much. I'm able to make the money I've made because there were so many times I sacrificed learning a skill set, learning to do something, being in an environment where I could become aware of what's happening, that now I'm able to use that. And so I think you have to understand what you're trying to get back is one of the other ones. Now, on the other side of it, sometimes you got to be honest. There's nothing wrong. When you're in a situation, you're like, nope, just be straight up. No, if I'm doing this, I got to get something back because right now, the cost benefit isn't that for me. I'm like, man, this could be helpful, but man, for me to do this, no, I got to be getting this back. And I think you have to define what that looks like. So I think, one, if you're going to give something up, it's got to be on purpose, or something that's really into your purpose. On the other side of it, if you're going to be where it's a trade-off, you have to be very clear of what you need and what you're wanting from that, and be very upfront in that from the beginning.
That's helpful, because I think for those that are younger and our listeners that are younger, we're very immersed in an environment that is constantly like, what are you getting from that? You don't deserve this. You should be receiving more, whether that is within your workplace, whether that is within your romantic relationships and that kind of thing. And there is, of course, always a healthy standard.
Yep.
But sometimes, personally, I feel anxious when I consume content like that, because I'm like, should I be receiving more than what I am? Am I not holding the line right? So I can understand why it can feel so confusing at times on how to navigate life, on when something should be given back, but also to not develop a heart that's feels like people owe you something.
Very good. Yeah. So I think what you have to do is being aware of yourself. If you have a natural bent of codependency, then, it's that whole idea, you know what I'm saying, is the thought that wisdom, was it how Doc said? Wisdom is the ditch, right?
Wisdom is a road with ditches on either side.
Yeah, wisdom is a road with ditches on either side. And I think for me, I can sometimes have that ditch on the other side of codependency. So what I will do is go into a situation and be the one who I should be receiving more. But I'll be like, no, I don't think, because of whatever, I don't feel like I deserve it or whatever. I'll kind of lean over there and kind of sometimes be taken advantage of a little bit, right? If you're somebody who your instant thing is like, nope, no one's ever going to take advantage of me, nope, da-da-da, you may need to lean in a little bit different to the other side of that. So I think you have to be aware of self. in that process. But I think you make a very valid point. I think in the generation that's coming up, like Gen Z, and again, I'm using that very just kind of like as a blanket statement. I think a lot of times it is that, and not just Gen Z, I think millennials as well, that people aren't realizing other stuff you get. It's not just monetary. The level, let me tell you this, a mentor of mine, he's made a real big impact in my life. I've spent countless hours just sitting with this person in their office. And sometimes they'll be on the phone. Sometimes they'll be doing other stuff. And I just sit in there. And I'm telling you, I've learned so much. I've learned how to build great culture. I've learned how to navigate complex relationships simply by just being in the environment. Now, here's the thing. I like that right there. To learn that from somebody else, people pay money. As a matter of fact, people pay me money now to help them figure out what I got to learn for free. And so sometimes I think you have to understand everything is not just about like this monetary thing. Man, there's times where you're in an environment that you just need to learn and you're getting a bunch of stuff that matters a ton. And not everyone's trying to take advantage of you. I think that's one of the biggest things right now in the generations coming up, that everyone's screaming they feel like someone's taking advantage of them. And I think, man, I think people can miss out on some incredible opportunities because of a fear of something that may not be actually taking place.
I like the story that you're kind of referencing there, because I do think there's a whole different point within that we talk about a lot, which is learning how to have good character, even when you are being called to serve somebody who does not treat you in the way that you want to.
Yeah, because I think that even and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, I think you have to be very careful and evaluate if a situation is toxic or not. Because right now, anything that makes us uncomfortable, the natural tendency is for people to say it's toxic. But what I've learned is that you should not stay in a toxic environment. What I mean by that, an abusive environment, an environment that's harmful to you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you have to know that and not be in those. But if it's a tough environment, if it's an environment that's challenging, if it's an environment that may not be that, listen, I've learned some of the greatest lessons being in unhealthy environments, honestly. I learned what not to do. I learned, man, I would evaluate, how did we get here? How did this person get here? I know they're not naturally this way, but how did they do that? I've learned so much about how to build by not being in great environments. And I think, or being under leadership at times that have been the most encouraging or the most empowering or whatever it may be. I think that's where you have to then count the cost to know where you're supposed to be. And so I think that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of insight. It takes a lot of like slowing down and reflecting, because not every situation that may not seem perfect may not be, bad for you. I mean, gosh, we read history of people in their lives, and they've been in very tough environments, but those tough environments help shape them to be who they needed to be. And so I think if we're not careful, people are going to limit their capacity as leaders because they're consistently, they're not counting the cost. They're not actually going through like, yeah, you know what? You may be in an environment that's going to suck. And you know what you need to do? That's going to dude, you're going to have to mourn. You're going to be like, God, I got to be in this thing right now. But you may know that, man, for the next year and a half, 2 years, this environment's going to be bad. But I know there's something I'm going to learn from here. There's something I'm going to learn to get better here. There's going to be some toughness I'm going to learn, whatever it may be that you'll get from the environment. So I think that's where, I always say, don't just run away from every environment that makes you uncomfortable. And I know, that's not a popular thing to say, but I also think it's something that needs to be said, because I think people are we're not building strong leaders, because I think people aren't going to have the resilience they need and the toughness they need when things get there. And here's the other thing. If you're not careful, sometimes why we get better environments is because you've been in a crappy one. And you're like, I don't ever want to produce that. If you've never been in a crappy one, then you know what? You're not going to be aware that you're producing one. And so I think that's really important to recognize that.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about that, you can listen to our podcast episode. I believe it's called The Benefits of Toxic Leadership or something along those lines.
Spicy title.
Yeah, go give it a listen. We talk about that entire segment for an hour.
Yeah.
So what do you have in place in your life that sets you up to embrace the process of counting the cost well?
I think the first thing is that being able to look at a situation and I think just take my time to just try to look at every angle. Like, take my time to say, okay, what are the benefits that are going to come from this? List, kind of like think about those, list those out, but then say, okay, but what are even with the benefit, what are the negatives that come with that? Man, there may be, if I do this goes well, this is going to give me more opportunity for this. Okay, what comes with that more opportunity? A little bit more stress, a little bit more time, a little bit more a time away from, from family, or time away from friendships, or time away from maybe a hobby, whatever it may be. I think you got to be able to look at those things and count those things. I think also the other thing I have in process once I do that is their willingness to like be okay. And I say it's like pre-mourning a situation, realizing, man, you're going to like lose something for a season of life, one of the things is that like, it was interesting that and it may sound, this is going to sound something really dumb, but like it really was. But like, I stopped playing golf, right? Like, I actually really used to like playing golf, but I realized that I think Jalen may have been like 2 or 3, and Wendy was totally fine with me playing. But for me, I could not justify of like, man, going out there, once, twice a week. Golf is never like 30 minutes. You're out there for minimum. You know what I'm saying? Of like a couple hours while you're out there. Then on top of that, I was way too competitive, so I don't want to suck at it. So, not only am I going to play once or twice a week, I'm going to go out there and hit range balls for 2 or 3 times. And you're just like, and I got to a place where I'm like, and then I was like, okay, doing that and still trying to do like, okay, and I want to be a good father, and I want to be engaged with my wife, and I also want to do these other business things and leadership and all this. And I'm like, okay, I can't do this. And so honestly, like, I like had to put it down, and you know what? And it was like, it kind of sucked, and it was okay. Like, I literally was like sad for like a half a day. I'm like, dude, this sucks. I'm not going to play golf. But me going through that allowed me to like kind of like not do it. But I knew I had to do that I had to let go of something in order to grab a hold of something. And so I think that you have to sometimes, when you realize that, like, to mourn something, it's there. I mean, like, let's say you have a great opportunity to take a job, and you're going to a new place, but man, you're maybe leaving people you like working with. It's okay. Like, like, God, that sucks. And however you mourn through stuff, do that. Because what we'll do is saying, we won't think about it, the emotions, how it's impacting us, and we'll just move on. And eventually that stuff catches up to you. So that's one of the things. So I try to look at every angle. I try to like pre-mourn through that process. And as well, when I'm going in there, I try to realize, like, man, I try as best I can, realizing if this goes well, where am I going to really have to say no to? Because when something goes well, more opportunities come up. So where am I going to have to say no? So already trying my best to prepare myself to where I'm going to have to say no in a situation.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned being sad for like a day and a half after giving up golf. But I also know that every time you walk into that garage and you see them golf clubs sitting there, you're reminded of it again.
Because here's the thing, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, because I got rid of all my golf clubs. And so about 2 years ago, I was like, you know what, because Jalen's a little bit older, I'm like, I'm going to kind of get back into golf. And so I had a friend of mine who has an online golf store. And he's like, man, I'll take care of you. So I got this stuff. I mean, and they're really good clubs. I mean, I think I've swung them things maybe like 4 times or something like that.
Too.
They are. And I'm like, and every now and then I'm like, I want to go do it. I'm going to get back into it, whatever. And I think I will. You know what I'm saying? I think, there's a couple more weeks until Jalen graduates, things like that. I think I may get back into it. But it's always those moments where I'm like, hey, well, I want to do this. Or, like me and you talked about like DJing, right? I'm like, hey, I think it's between those. And literally, it's literally between those two. I can't do both. I can't like golf and do this. I don't have the time. I got to pick one or the other. So I still think I'm wrestling right now which one I want to do. Because you know me, whatever I do, I want to actually do it well. And so I'm kind of like, which one do I want to go with?
Yeah,
so.
You're going to be more frustrated if you do it for, an hour or 2 hours here and there than you will be satisfied. So you're mentally like, I'd rather just wait until I have the time to invest in it, and I'll keep my energy towards the new things I'm trying to
Absolutely.
create.
And here's the other thing. I love, and I'll be honest with you, I love playing video games. Like, I literally do. And so part of it's like, okay, that was kind of one of my hobbies. I was like, all right, now I'm not willing to give that one up. Mm-hmm. So some people are like, that's dumb. Like, that's fine. But like, I'd rather be able to play 2K a little bit versus whatever. So that's kind of some of those choices.
For our listeners who might be kind of in the middle, in the chasm of, I really want to do this thing. I've counted what I have to give up. and I'm in that middle phase where I'm not where I want to be yet, and I'm still just day in and day out having to grind, having to give these things up, and I haven't seen the fruit from it yet. Can you tell them what you tell yourself?
Yeah. I think you have to, when you're in it, you have to always remind yourself what was spoken to you, what you heard before you got into it. Because whenever you're in it, you're going to want to tap out. You know what I'm saying? I tell people, don't form worldviews, don't form new views when you're in the midst of like your storm or you're in that valley of doing it. You have to remind yourself, this was the last thing spoke to me. Here's the second thing, is what we've talked a lot recently, is practicing presence. You got to be in the moment. One of the things that gets people really messed up when they're in that phase, it's always the fear of the future, of is it ever going to happen, or the regret of the past, versus being, nope, I am right here in this day, in this hour, in this minute, focusing on what's in front of me. If you can really practice presence, it really helps you be in that moment, and it helps you stay the course to what you want to do. And here's the third thing. After you've done it, I think I always tell people, man, give yourself a timeline too. Give yourself a timeline when you go in hey, I'm going to give myself a year. And at a year, I'm going to evaluate in 1 year. Until that 1 year, I'm not going to think about it. But that's okay, because you may get into something for a year and you're like, dude, man, I just know for whatever reason, this isn't it. And it's okay to tap out and to go do something different. But give yourself a time frame where, hey, I'm going to evaluate this at this point. Don't every 4 days. No. Give yourself time. I'm not going to think about it until that point in time. But those are just a few different things I think that can actually help you while you're in that process. But the grind is real. But I tell you, as you walk through it, there's just so much that you learn from it as you actually kind of stay through it, and you're willing to do that. And here's the thing, and when those opportunities and those things come your way, when you learn things from it, man, you value them way more because it costs you something. It costs you a lot, and so you begin to appreciate it way more. Well, guys, hey, we hope that this was helpful today. And here's what I'm going to encourage you with is that, listen, when you're out there making decisions, do your best to try to examine it. Go into it with your eyes not wide shut, but with your eyes wide open to see the best, all the angles, all the things, understanding what you're giving up, what you're going to gain, because those things are incredibly important, because that's how, as leaders, we're able to sustain us. As leaders, we're able to make it through. Until next time, keep writing new rules.